Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive we're doing today. We're going to be looking at Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and really kind of exploring this whole idea of what it means to live wholeheartedly, embracing our vulnerability and finding the courage to be ourselves and building real connection with others. One of the things that I find so fascinating about Brown's work is that she takes these big, sometimes kind of intimidating concepts
Yeah,
and makes them feel so relatable.
absolutely. And one of the things that really sets her work apart, I think, is how she weaves in her own personal stories and struggles. It makes you realize that even someone who studies courage and vulnerability for a living still grapples with those things in their own life.
Yeah, totally. It's like she's right there with you, kind of figuring it all out in real time. So I'm curious, for you, when you first kind of dove into Brown's research, what was the most surprising or unexpected thing you discovered about this idea of wholeheartedness?
Going in, I kind of thought it would be all about self-love and positive affirmations, but what Brown actually emphasizes is the importance of digging into the messy stuff. The vulnerabilities, the imperfections. She argues that you can't truly experience joy and connection without also embracing those kind of shadow sides of ourselves.
That's such a good point. It's like we're so conditioned to present this perfect, polished version of ourselves to the world that we end up hiding those parts that make us feel, well, human.
Exactly. And that's where shame comes in. Brown talks about this difference between fitting in and belonging. We might try to fit in by conforming to certain expectations, but that often comes at the cost of authenticity. True belonging, on the other hand, requires us to show up as our true selves, even the messy bits.
Okay, so let's unpack that shame piece a little more. I know it's a big part of Brown's work, and it can be such a heavy, uncomfortable emotion to deal with.
Yeah, and she makes this really crucial distinction between shame and guilt, which is something I hadn't really considered before. Guilt, she says, is about our behavior. We feel bad about something we did. But shame is directed at ourselves. It's that feeling of, I am bad, I am unworthy.
Wow, yeah. That difference is huge. And I know for me personally, when I'm feeling shame, it's like this total shutdown mode. I just want to hide and disappear. Whereas guilt, it might be uncomfortable, but it can also motivate me to make things right.
Exactly. And that's where self-compassion comes in. It's about recognizing that we're all imperfect, that we all make mistakes. And instead of beating ourselves up, we can offer ourselves the same kindness and understanding that we would give to a friend.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, sometimes that self-compassion piece feels really hard.
Yeah.
It's like, I know I should be kinder to myself, but those critical voices can be so loud. Any tips on how to actually cultivate more self-compassion?
One thing Brown suggests is to actually talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend in a similar situation. Would you berate them for making a mistake? Or would you offer support and encouragement? Sometimes simply shifting the language we use with ourselves can make a big difference.
That's a really helpful tip. So we've got this foundation of vulnerability, authenticity, and self-compassion. Where do these gifts of imperfection come into play?
Well, Brown identifies 3 core gifts: courage, compassion, and connection. And what's interesting is that they're all interwoven. One strengthens the other.
So let's start with courage. What does that look like in the context of wholehearted living?
For Brown, courage isn't about grand gestures or facing down our fears in some dramatic way. It's about the everyday bravery of showing up as our authentic selves, even when it feels scary. It's about speaking our truth, setting boundaries, and allowing ourselves to be seen, imperfections and all.
That makes so much sense. It's like those small acts of courage can actually be the most powerful.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that we practice daily.
Absolutely. And one of the things I really admire about Brown's work is that she doesn't shy away from her own struggles with courage. She talks about bombing a talk and the shame spiral that followed. But what struck me was how she used that experience as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Oh, I remember that story. It was so refreshing to hear someone so accomplished talk about failing so publicly. It definitely made me feel less alone in my own moments of self-doubt.
Right. And it highlights how courage isn't about never feeling fear or never making mistakes. It's about having the willingness to keep going even when it's tough.
Okay, so we've talked about courage. Let's move on to compassion. How does that fit into the picture?
Brown argues that true compassion starts with ourselves. It's about recognizing our common humanity and offering ourselves the same kindness and understanding that we would give to others.
That makes sense. It's like we can't truly connect with and support others if we're constantly beating ourselves up, right?
Exactly. And this links directly to connection. Brown's research shows that genuine connection requires us to be vulnerable, to let go of the need to be perfect. and to allow ourselves to be seen for who we truly are.
Okay, vulnerability and connection. This is where I start to feel a little hesitant. I mean, it's scary to put ourselves out there, right? What if we get hurt or rejected?
Of course it's scary. But Brown argues that vulnerability is not weakness. It's actually the birthplace of joy, creativity, and belonging. It's about letting go of the need to control and predict everything, and allowing ourselves to experience life fully.
I'm sensing a theme here. Courage, compassion, connection, they all seem to require us to step outside of our comfort zones.
They do. And that's where the real growth happens.
This has been such an insightful conversation so far. I'm already feeling inspired to dig deeper into these concepts, but I have to admit it all feels a bit overwhelming. Where do we even begin to put these ideas into practice? I mean, how do we actually start living more wholeheartedly?
That's a great question. And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. Brown's 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. Think of them as a roadmap for cultivating those qualities we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's take a look at those guideposts, but first, maybe we should grab a refill on those drinks. All right, so we're back, and I'm ready to kind of delve into these guideposts a little bit more. You know, it's interesting, we talk about living wholeheartedly, but it feels like our culture often pushes us in the opposite direction, right? Like we're supposed to be constantly hustling and achieving and striving for perfection.
Yeah, it's true. There's this pressure to always be on, to never show weakness. And I think that can make these ideas feel really countercultural in a way. But that's also why Brown's work is so important. You know, it offers a different way of being in the world.
Totally. Okay, so let's dive into those 10 guideposts that she lays out. Where do we even begin?
Well, remember how we were talking about the difference between fitting in and belonging? That first guidepost, cultivating authenticity, is all about that. It's about letting go of who you think you're supposed to be and embracing who you actually are.
That sounds great in theory, but in practice, it feels hard. Like, how do you even know what your authentic self is? It feels like this big, elusive thing.
You know, Brown actually talks about authenticity as a practice, not a destination. You know, it's not like you wake up one day and suddenly you're completely authentic. It's about making these small daily choices to show up as your true self, even when it feels uncomfortable.
So give me an example. What would that look like in everyday life?
It could be something as simple as saying no to something you don't want to do, even if you're worried about disappointing someone, or speaking up about your needs, even if you're afraid of being perceived as needy or demanding. Or it could be about sharing something personal, even if you're worried about being judged.
Those are really relatable examples. I think one of the biggest things that holds me back from being more authentic is this fear of judgment. Like, what if people don't like the real me?
Yeah, that's such a common fear. And it makes sense. We're social creatures, and we want to be accepted. But here's the thing. Brown's research shows that the people who are the most loved and respected are those who are willing to be vulnerable, to let people see their imperfections.
That's interesting. So it's actually the opposite of what we're often taught. We think we need to be perfect to be loved.
Yeah.
But really, it's our imperfections that make us relatable and lovable.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second guidepost, cultivating self-compassion. Because let's be real, when we're trying to be more authentic, we're going to mess up sometimes. We're going to say the wrong thing, make mistakes, maybe even hurt people's feelings. And that's where self-compassion becomes so crucial. It's about offering ourselves grace and understanding even when we fall short.
Okay, self-compassion. I can see how that ties into authenticity. But to be honest, I still struggle with this idea. It's like I know I should be kinder to myself, but I often feel like I don't deserve it.
I hear you. And Brown talks about this too. A lot of us have this inner critic that's constantly telling us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. And that inner critic can make it really hard to access self-compassion.
Oh, tell me about it. My inner critic has a PhD in finding fault.
Right. But here's what I found helpful. Brown suggests actually picturing your inner critic as a separate entity, like a grumpy little gremlin sitting on your shoulder. And then instead of engaging with its negativity, you can just acknowledge its presence. Oh, there you are again. And then choose to focus on a more compassionate voice.
Okay, I like that. It's almost like giving that inner critic less power by not taking it so seriously.
Exactly. And speaking of not taking ourselves so seriously, that brings us to the third guidepost, cultivating a resilient spirit. Because life is messy and things are going to happen that knock us down. But a resilient spirit allows us to bounce back from those challenges, to learn and grow from them, and to keep moving forward.
I love that. Resilience feels like such a superpower in today's world,
Yeah.
where there's so much pressure and uncertainty. So how do we actually cultivate resilience? It feels like one of those things that some people are just naturally better at than others.
It's true. Some people might have a natural predisposition towards resilience, but it's also a skill that can be learned and strengthened. Brown talks about the importance of leaning into discomfort, of not trying to avoid or numb out difficult emotions.
Okay, so it's about facing those challenges head on, even when it feels scary.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that vulnerability is not weakness. It's actually the source of our strength. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to feel our feelings fully, we actually become more resilient.
That's such a powerful reframing of vulnerability. I think we're often taught to avoid vulnerability at all costs. But what you're saying is that it's actually essential for building resilience.
It is. And Brown talks about this idea of the rumble, which she describes as those messy, uncomfortable moments where we're forced to confront our fears and insecurities. But she argues that it's in those rumbles that we develop the courage and resilience to face life's challenges.
That makes so much sense. It's like we can't build resilience by avoiding the hard stuff. We have to actually go through it.
Exactly. And this connects to the fourth guidepost, which might seem a bit unexpected. Cultivating gratitude and joy. Now you might be thinking, what does joy have to do with resilience? But Brown argues that cultivating gratitude and joy is actually an act of resistance, especially in a culture that often focuses on what's wrong or what we're lacking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this connection between gratitude, joy, and resilience.
It's about choosing to focus on the good, even when things are tough. It's about recognizing the beauty and abundance in our lives, even amidst the challenges. And this doesn't mean ignoring the hard stuff. It's about holding both the joy and the sorrow, the light and the dark at the same time.
That's a really powerful concept. It's about finding that balance, acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience.
Exactly. And something that's helped me cultivate more gratitude in my own life is practicing mindfulness. It's about paying attention to the present moment, noticing the small things that often go unnoticed, like the warmth of the sun on my skin or the sound of laughter in the distance.
That's such a great suggestion.
Yeah.
It's like we're so often caught up in our thoughts and worries that we forget to appreciate the beauty that's right in front of us.
Right. And those small moments of joy and gratitude can actually help us build resilience because they remind us that even in the midst of challenges, there's still goodness to be found.
Okay, I'm loving this conversation. We've covered authenticity, self-compassion, resilience, gratitude, and joy. What's next on this journey of wholehearted living?
Well, I'm really fascinated by the next guidepost because it's all about trusting our inner wisdom. Brown calls it cultivating intuition and trusting faith.
Ooh, that sounds interesting, but also a little intimidating. I mean, intuition and faith, those feel like pretty big leaps, especially for someone like me who tends to rely on logic and reason.
I hear you. And it's important to note that Brown isn't talking about blind faith or ignoring logic altogether. It's more about recognizing that there's a wisdom within us that goes beyond our rational minds.
Okay, so it's about tapping into that inner knowing, that gut feeling that sometimes tells us what we need to do, even when it doesn't make sense logically.
Exactly. And it's about having the courage to trust that inner voice, even when it leads us in unexpected directions.
This is really resonating with me. I think so often I try to figure everything out with my head, and I end up overthinking and second-guessing myself. Maybe it's time to start paying more attention to my intuition.
I think that's a great idea. And, one of the things Brown talks about is that intuition is like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, I like that analogy. So we're building authenticity, self-compassion, resilience, gratitude, joy, A&D, intuition. I'm starting to feel like a superhero in training. What other superpowers await us on this wholehearted journey?
Well, the next guidepost is all about unleashing our creative potential. Brown calls it cultivating creativity. And she argues that creativity is not just about artistic expression. It's about bringing something new and original into the world, whatever that may be.
Okay, so it's not just about painting or writing poetry. It's about approaching life with a sense of curiosity and playfulness, finding new ways to solve problems and expressing ourselves authentically.
Exactly. And, one of the things Brown points out is that a lot of us have this inner critic that tells us we're not creative enough, that we're not good enough at art or music or whatever it may be. But she argues that we all have creative potential. It's just a matter of tapping into it. So how do we silence that inner critic and unleash our creative superpowers?
Brown suggests a few things. One is to simply start creating, even if it's just for ourselves. It could be something as simple as doodling in a notebook, trying a new recipe, or rearranging the furniture in your living room. The point is to get out of our heads and into our bodies, to allow ourselves to play and experiment without judgment.
I love that. It's about giving ourselves permission to be messy and imperfect, to not take ourselves so seriously.
Exactly. And another thing Brown talks about is the importance of finding our own unique creative voice. We don't have to compare ourselves to others or try to be something we're not. It's about embracing our own style and letting our authentic selves shine through.
Okay, this is really inspiring. I'm already feeling my creative juices flowing.
That's great. And cultivating creativity can actually benefit us in all areas of life. It can help us be more innovative at work, more present in our relationships, and more resilient in the face of challenges. This is incredible. We've already covered so much ground on this journey of wholehearted living. I'm curious, what other gems of wisdom does Brown have in store for us?
Well, the next two guideposts are about taking care of ourselves on a deeper level. Brown calls them cultivating play and rest, and cultivating calm and stillness.
Okay, those sound lovely, but also a little guilt-inducing. Like in our culture of busyness and productivity, rest and play often feel like luxuries we don't have time for.
It's true. We're often conditioned to believe that we have to be constantly on to be successful or worthy. But Brown argues that rest and play are not indulgences. They're essential for our physical, emotional, and mental well-being.
Okay, so tell me more about this. Why are play and rest so important, especially for adults?
It helps us tap into our sense of joy and wonder. It allows us to be spontaneous, creative, and present in the moment. And rest allows us to recharge our batteries, both physically and emotionally. It gives us the space to process our experiences, to connect with ourselves, and to simply be.
I'm starting to see how these two guideposts are really interconnected. It's like play helps us tap into our inner child, that sense of freedom and joy, and rest allows us to integrate those experiences and recharge.
Exactly. And Brown talks about how the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. And the opposite of rest is not productivity, it's exhaustion.
Wow, those are powerful statements. It really puts things into perspective.
It does, right? And I think I often wear exhaustion as a badge of honor. Like it's proof that we're working hard enough. But in reality, it's detrimental to our health and well-being.
Okay, so how do we shift our mindset and start prioritizing rest and play? I mean, it's easy to say, but it feels so hard to actually do.
It can be challenging, especially when we're used to operating at a certain pace. But Brown suggests starting small. Maybe it's taking 5 minutes each day to do something you enjoy, whether it's reading a book, listening to music, or taking a walk in nature.
That's a great suggestion. It's about finding those small pockets of time where we can disconnect from the demands of daily life and just be present with ourselves.
Exactly. And it's also about setting boundaries and saying no to things that drain our energy. We don't have to say yes to everything or try to please everyone.
This is all making so much sense. But I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by all these guideposts. It's like, I want to do it all, but where do I even begin?
It is a lot to take in. And remember, these guideposts are not a checklist or a set of rules. They're more like invitations to explore different aspects of ourselves and to find what works for us.
Okay, that's helpful. So it's not about trying to be perfect at all of these things. It's about experimenting and finding what resonates with us.
Exactly. And one of the things Brown emphasizes is the importance of self-compassion throughout this process. We're going to mess up, we're going to fall short, and that's okay. The key is to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn and grow.
That's such a reassuring message. I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to be good at personal growth that we forget to be kind to ourselves along the way.
It's true. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There's no finish line. And it's okay to stumble along the way. The important thing is to keep moving forward with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to embrace the messy beauty of being human.
So we've explored all these guideposts, and they really do paint a picture of what it means to live wholeheartedly. But I'm kind of curious, how do we actually put all this into practice? It feels like a lot to juggle.
Yeah, it can definitely feel overwhelming. And this is where Brown introduces this really practical framework. She calls it dig deep.
Okay, tell me more about dig deep. What does that even stand for?
So it stands for get deliberate, get inspired, and get going. It's about taking intentional action, finding those things that light you up, and then actually putting those insights into practice. It's like a personalized action plan for wholehearted living.
I love that. It's like we've got this beautiful map with all these guideposts, and now we need a compass and a backpack to actually start the journey. So let's break it down. What does it mean to get deliberate?
So getting deliberate is about setting intentions and making conscious choices. It's about identifying those areas where you want to grow and then figuring out what specific steps you can take to move in that direction.
So it's not just about vaguely wanting to be more courageous or compassionate. It's about actually setting goals and making a plan.
Exactly. And Brown suggests a few specific exercises that can help with this. Remember that self-compassion scale we talked about earlier? Taking that can be a really helpful starting point.
Right, because it gives you that baseline assessment of where you're at and helps you identify those areas where you might need to focus your efforts. What about get inspired? Where do we find that spark to keep us moving forward?
Inspiration can come from all sorts of places. Brown talks about the power of connecting with nature, listening to music that moves you, reading inspiring books or articles, or surrounding yourself with people who embody the qualities you aspire to cultivate.
Those are all great ideas. It's like finding those things that fill your cup and remind you why this journey is important to you. What about the get going part? This is where things get real right.
Absolutely. This is where we move from thinking about change to actually making it happen. And this is where Brown's suggestions get really practical. For example, she talks about setting aside dedicated time for creative activities, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Okay, so that could be anything from writing in a journal to painting to playing an instrument to dancing in your living room, whatever brings you joy and helps you tap into that creative energy.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a huge time commitment. Even just 5 or 10 minutes a day can make a big difference. Another suggestion she offers is to practice the vowel check as a daily intention-setting exercise.
The vowel check, yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Remind me how that works.
Sure. So it's a really simple but powerful tool. Each vowel represents a question to ask yourself throughout the day. So it goes like this. A, ask yourself, have I been abstinent today from those things that I'm trying to let go of? It could be anything from negative self-talk to unhealthy habits, to things that drain your energy.
Okay, so it's about setting boundaries and making conscious choices about how we spend our time and energy. What about E?
E stands for exercise. It's a reminder to move your body, to get your blood flowing, and to prioritize your physical well-being.
And I?
Stands for, what have I done for myself today?
Right.
This one encourages self-care and self-compassion. It's about making sure you're taking care of your own needs and giving yourself permission to rest and recharge.
I love that. It's so easy to get caught up in taking care of everyone else that we forget to take care of ourselves. Okay, what about O?
O stands for, what have I done for others today? It's a reminder to cultivate connection and contribution. It's about finding ways to make a positive impact in the world, even in small ways.
Okay, so it's about shifting our focus from me to we. And remembering that we're all interconnected. What's you?
U stands for, am I holding on to any unexpressed emotions today? This one encourages emotional honesty and processing. It's about giving ourselves permission to feel our feelings fully and to find healthy ways to express them.
I love that. I think we often try to suppress our emotions, but really they just end up coming out in other ways, like through anger or resentment or physical symptoms.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, what is why?
Is for, it's about celebrating the small wins and cultivating gratitude. It's about taking a moment to appreciate the good things in our lives, even amidst the challenges.
I love how this simple vowel check encompasses so many of the guideposts we've been discussing. It's like a mini checklist for wholehearted living.
It is. Brown offers other practical suggestions as well, like creating a gratitude jar to collect those little moments of appreciation, or identifying your personal criteria for meaningful work. The key is to find those actions that resonate with you and that you can realistically incorporate into your daily life.
This has been such a practical and empowering deep dive. We've explored these big, beautiful concepts of courage, compassion, and connection. And we've also walked away with some really tangible tools to help us put those ideas into practice.
And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There's no finish line, and it's okay to stumble along the way. What's important is to keep moving forward with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to embrace the messy beauty of being human.
So well said. And if there's one final thought I could leave our listeners with, it would be this. What does wholehearted living mean to you? And how might it look different from someone else's interpretation?
That's such a great question. It's about creating a life that is authentically yours, a life that is filled with courage, compassion, connection, and joy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. We hope you've been inspired and encouraged to embark on your own journey toward wholehearted living.